For more than half a century, Dolly Parton seemed like someone who simply refused to slow down. She built a career that stretched from the mountains of Tennessee to the biggest stages in America, becoming a singer, songwriter, actress, businesswoman, and philanthropist, whose name eventually became known around the world. But behind the glitter, the famous smile, and the endless jokes, Dolly's story was also shaped by family, loss, sacrifice, and difficult personal moments. She grew up in a large and very poor family in the Tennessee mountains, where music was part of everyday life, and where her mother filled the home with songs, stories, and traditions. Dolly later transformed those childhood experiences into some of the most personal music of her career. Her family had very little money, and she often spoke about how difficult those early years were, including the story that her father once paid the doctor who delivered her with a bag of cornmeal because the family could not afford a normal fee. But poverty never stopped Dolly from dreaming. She began performing when she was young, eventually moving toward Nashville and signing with Monument Records in 1965. The label initially tried to steer her toward pop music, but Dolly's determination pushed her toward country music. In 1967, she released her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly, and soon received the opportunity that would change the direction of her career when Porter Wagoner invited her onto his television show. Dolly replaced Norma Jean, and some viewers initially resisted the change, but she gradually won them over. Wagoner became an important mentor and helped Dolly establish herself in the country music world. Their partnership brought success, but Dolly increasingly wanted to prove that she could succeed independently. Eventually, she made the decision to move forward as a solo artist, a choice that would help launch one of the most extraordinary careers in music history. While her professional life continued to grow, Dolly's personal life was also developing. In 1964, she met Carl Dean outside a laundromat in Nashville, and their relationship eventually led to marriage. They married on May 30, 1966, in Ringgold, Georgia, in a small ceremony attended by only a handful of people. Unlike Dolly, Carl strongly preferred privacy and stayed away from the celebrity world. Their relationship remained largely outside the spotlight, and Dolly repeatedly emphasized how important that private life was to her. For nearly 6 decades, Carl remained her husband while Dolly became one of the most recognizable entertainers on the planet. But the later years of their marriage brought challenges. Dolly spent a significant amount of time caring for Carl as his health declined, and she later acknowledged that during that period she had not paid enough attention to her own health. At the same time, the Parton family experienced painful losses, including the deaths of several of Dolly's brothers. Those years brought grief that affected the entire family. Dolly continued working, however, often using humor and optimism to deal with difficult circumstances. Then, in March 2025, Carl Dean died, bringing an end to one of the longest and most private relationships of Dolly's life. His death deeply affected her, and the months afterward became increasingly important when looking at the final chapter of her story. Dolly had already spent years balancing work, family responsibilities, and caregiving, and after Carl's death, she began facing health issues of her own. In September 2025, she announced that she was postponing her planned Las Vegas residency because of health challenges. The announcement was concerning because Dolly had spent decades performing and rarely allowed obstacles to stop her, but she tried to reassure her fans and made it clear that she intended to focus on treatment and recovery. Then came October. Dolly's sister, Frida Parton, shared a message asking people to pray for Dolly. Because of Dolly's enormous popularity, the message spread rapidly online. Fans became frightened, and some began assuming that something much more serious had happened. But the original message did not announce a terminal diagnosis or say that Dolly was dying. It was a family member asking people to pray for her sister. Soon afterward, Dolly addressed the public herself. In a video message, she reassured fans and joked that she was not dead yet. Her humor helped calm the situation, but her comments also made something clear. She really had been dealing with health problems and needed time to recover. Looking back, that period has become one of the most discussed parts of Dolly's final story. But it is important not to turn her family's concern into something it was never proven to be. There is no reliable evidence that her sisters secretly knew Dolly was going to die, or that they were sending the public a hidden warning. What we can say is that Dolly's family was concerned. Dolly was experiencing health difficulties, and she was trying to remain positive while dealing with problems away from the cameras. As 2026 began, Dolly continued to focus on recovery while maintaining an interest in her creative projects. She turned 80 in January, a remarkable milestone for someone whose career had already lasted for generations. She continued to be associated with Dollywood, music, philanthropy, and her planned Broadway project. But her health remained an obstacle. Her schedule became more limited, and the Las Vegas plans that had already been postponed were eventually canceled. For fans, the cancellation was another indication that Dolly's health was more complicated than many people had initially understood. Yet even then, she continued to speak about the future rather than presenting herself as someone who had given up. That determination had always been part of her personality. Dolly had spent her entire career turning setbacks into new opportunities, and even during difficult periods, she tried to give people something positive to hold on to. Her final year was therefore not simply a story about illness. It was also a story about grief after losing Carl, the importance of family, the reality of getting older, and the determination to continue creating despite physical limitations. Dolly's sisters and relatives knew the private version of her that fans could never completely see. To millions of people, she was an icon, but to them, she was simply their sister and family member. That distinction matters because celebrity can make ordinary human struggles look like mysteries. Sometimes, the explanation is not a secret. Sometimes a family is simply worried about someone they love. Dolly's final months were filled with exactly that kind of concern. And then came the moment that changed everything. On August 25, 2026, Dolly Parton died at the age of 80. Her death brought an extraordinary life to an end and immediately caused fans around the world to look back at the events of the previous year. Suddenly, the postponed performances, health updates, family concerns, and public reassurances felt different. Moments that once seemed temporary became part of a final timeline. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is that Dolly never allowed those difficulties to completely define her. She continued thinking about her work, her fans, her family, and the causes she cared about. Her legacy goes far beyond country music. She became a Hollywood actress, a successful entrepreneur, the creator of Dollywood, and one of the most generous philanthropists in entertainment. Her imagination library became one of her most meaningful achievements, helping provide books to children and encouraging young people to discover the power of reading. That may ultimately be one of the best ways to understand Dolly Parton's life. She started with very little, but she spent decades creating opportunities for other people. She turned childhood memories into songs, personal struggles into stories, and success into philanthropy. Her final year may have been difficult, but it did not erase everything she had built. Instead, it showed the human side of someone who had spent most of her life appearing larger than life. Dolly Parton's death is undoubtedly the end of an era, but it is not the end of her influence. Her songs will continue to be played. Her movies will continue to be watched. Dollywood will continue to welcome families, And children will continue to receive books through a program created from her belief in the importance of imagination. Her family experienced the private struggles behind the public smile, while millions of fans experienced the joy she created. And perhaps that is the most fitting way to remember her. Not through rumors about secret warnings or predictions, but through the life she actually lived. Dolly Parton faced poverty, rejection, heartbreak, grief, and health challenges, yet she continued to create, perform, give, and inspire. She became one of the most recognizable women in entertainment without forgetting the small Tennessee community that shaped her. Her story is ultimately about resilience. It is about taking whatever life gives you and finding a way to turn it into something meaningful. Dolly Parton may have taken her final bow at 80, but the legacy she created over 8 decades is far from finished. The music remains. The stories remain. The generosity remains. And somewhere, a child, opening a book through her imagination library, is still experiencing the impact of a woman who spent her life trying to make the world a little brighter. That is the part of Dolly Parton's story that will outlive the headlines, the rumors, and even the sadness of her final chapter. Her life was extraordinary. Her influence was enormous, and her mark on the world will remain for generations.